Welcome to Headline Wednesday from Dispatch U.S. Military History Magazine, developed by Trackpads.com.
Today, we go to the Marne front in World War I for the story of Belleau Wood. For readers who want the fuller version, the longer print edition includes fact sheets and photos and is available on LinkedIn or by email.
The wheat was high enough to brush a man's shoulders, golden and still in the June heat, when the first German machine guns opened up. Beyond the French village of Belleau in 1918, Marines of the United States 2nd Division moved forward in loose lines, with only chest-high grain and shallow folds of ground for cover. Somewhere ahead stood Belleau Wood, a dark tangle of trees already feared by French troops. The Marines knew they were entering the path of a major German push toward the Marne, but not yet how brutal the fight would become. Within minutes, the open fields taught them that courage alone would not be enough. Every rush forward had to be paid for under fire.
They had been ordered to hold near the Paris to Metz road and stop any further German advance toward the Marne River. German rifles and machine guns swept the fields, cutting through the grain and dropping men who had only recently arrived on the Western Front. Shells burst along the tree line, throwing splinters and branches into the air. Company commanders shouted for Marines to keep moving, rush by rush, into ditches, folds in the ground, and any low cover they could find. The open approach made every pause dangerous, because a machine gun that found the range could rake the wheat before anyone saw the crew that fired it.
French units that had held the sector earlier had warned that the assault was hopeless and had fallen back. The Marines, new to this kind of war, but determined to prove themselves, dug in instead. Supporting artillery fired into German positions, but the enemy guns kept working. The air smelled of cut grain, cordite, and damp earth. Corpsmen crawled to the wounded, rifles worked along the line, and the black edge of Belleau Wood seemed to pull at the entire formation.
To understand why these fields and trees mattered, we have to step back to the spring of 1918. Germany had launched a series of massive offensives on the Western Front, hoping to win the war before American strength arrived in overwhelming numbers. Freed from the Eastern Front after Russia's collapse, German commanders drove hard toward the Marne River and the routes pointing toward Paris. Fresh forces, exhausted by years of trench warfare, were under immense pressure.
Belleau Wood sat near Lucy-le-Bocage and Château-Thierry, astride key approaches to the Marne. If German infantry and storm troops broke through there, they would have a clearer path to river crossings and the French capital beyond. The road network and villages in this sector mattered because they connected local ground to the wider defense of Paris. The French command turned to the newly arrived American Expeditionary Forces, including the 2nd Division and its Marine Brigade, to plug the gap and hold the sector. For the Marines, the assignment was more than another stretch of front. Allied and German leaders were watching to see whether American troops could fight and absorb punishment in the hardest part of the line. If they held, confidence in the new American presence would grow. If they broke, German commanders would be encouraged and Allied doubts would deepen. The battle therefore carried a symbolic weight far beyond its size on the map. Under that fire, a reputation began to form, soon linked to the nickname Devil Dogs or Teufelhunden, a rough phrase that captured how relentless the Marines seemed to their enemies.
The Marines who reached Belleau Wood had crossed the Atlantic after training in stateside camps and French villages. For many in the 5th and 6th Regiments, the early weeks in France meant long marches, rifle ranges, gas masks, and lessons on artillery and trenches that had already consumed whole generations of European soldiers. They carried a strong identity and a culture that prized rifle marksmanship, discipline, and aggressive spirit. But they had not yet been tested in a sustained land battle on the Western Front.
By late May, training collided with crisis.
German attacks near the Marne rolled back battered French divisions, and headquarters rushed reserves toward threatened sectors. The 2nd Division, with its Marine Brigade and Army Brigade, moved toward Château-Thierry to help close the gap. The movement was hurried and uncomfortable, with units shifting into a sector whose roads, villages, and firing lines they had to learn quickly. When retreating French troops urged the Americans to fall back to a more defensible line, Marine officers refused. They chose to dig in along the existing front and absorb whatever came. The battle for Belleau Wood did not unfold in one clean rush. It lasted for weeks, with repeated assaults and counter-assaults turning the forest into a close-range struggle. After the first fighting across the wheat fields, Marine companies attacked the wood itself. They entered undergrowth, shattered trees, and concealed machine gun nests carefully prepared by German defenders. Visibility fell to a few yards in places, and parade ground formations broke into small groups, advancing from tree to tree. German machine guns swept the likely approaches, while artillery pounded the forest edges and fields whenever American movement was detected. Marines answered with disciplined rifle fire and small unit attacks. Squads searched for individual nests, crawled forward, and rushed with grenades and bayonets to clear positions one at a time. The fighting was intimate and confusing, often decided by a few men who could see only the next tree, rock, or flash of a gun. Each success was costly, and each captured strongpoint seemed to reveal another layer of defense beyond it.
Progress was measured in yards, knolls, crossroads, and shattered patches of ground. A company might seize a trench or gun position, be driven back by a counterattack, and then fight for the same ground again hours later. Casualties mounted quickly, and units that had seemed full on paper could be reduced to fragments by the end of a day. Medical teams worked under fire, pulling wounded men through brush and shell holes toward improvised aid stations. Runners carried messages through ravines and trampled wheat, trying to tell commanders which units were advancing, which were pinned down, and where the next push might succeed.
Day by day, the forest changed. Leaves were stripped away, trunks shattered, and the ground became a mix of splinters, shell craters, bodies, and broken equipment. The terrain itself became harder to read as every bombardment altered paths, cover, and landmarks. Night brought little rest, only digging, repositioning, evacuation, and short stretches of sleep broken by guns. Yet the Marines kept returning to the trees. The outcome depended on endurance, adaptation, and the willingness to keep attacking a shattered wood long after many units might have stopped.
The turning point came through learning under fire, not one single glorious charge. Early attacks had been brave but costly, often running straight into machine gun belts. As the days passed, Marine and Army officers studied the wood almost tree by tree. They mapped nests, ravines, and killing zones, and artillery officers worked more closely with frontline units. Barrages began to walk ahead of assault squads, shaking suspected strongpoints moments before Marines moved in behind smoke and splinters. The battle became a harsh lesson in modern combined arms fighting at small scale. Smaller units became the cutting edge. Instead of large exposed waves, platoons and squads moved in short bounds, using craters, stumps, and broken trunks for cover. Riflemen picked off exposed gunners, while others looped around strong points from the side or rear. When a machine gun nest fell, Marines often turned the captured weapon back down German fire lanes. Every fight over the same ground taught them more about how the wood was defended and where it might be cracked. Leadership at company and battalion level held the effort together. Officers and senior non-commissioned officers moved forward to steady shaken men, reorganize scattered groups, and launch new pushes when ammunition and strength allowed. Positions such as Hill 142 helped anchor further advances.
Word moved through the ranks that retreat was not an option. The line would hold, no matter how heavy the shelling or how many counterattacks came out of the trees.
By late June, after repeated assaults and relentless pressure, the remaining German defenders pulled back and Belleau Wood was reported cleared. The long, blood-soaked fight had tilted because the Americans refused to break while steadily improving how they fought. The Marines had gone from newcomers under test to a force German infantry could not easily push aside. The aftermath was measured in wreckage and casualty lists. The forest was reduced to splintered trunks and churned earth. Marine units that entered the battle near full strength came out missing entire platoons, with companies reduced to fragments. German defenders suffered heavily as well, leaving behind abandoned positions, damaged guns, and the dead among roots and rocks. The essential fact remained: the German advance toward the Marne and Paris had been stopped on this line.
At the campaign level, holding Belleau Wood helped blunt a key phase of the 1918 German offensive. By preventing a breakthrough near Château-Thierry, the Marines and their army partners bought time for Allied reserves to stabilize the front. The failure to crack through became part of a wider pattern of German offensives losing momentum as casualties, supply strain, and stiffening Allied resistance took their toll. That opened the way for later Allied counteroffensives. In France, news that Americans had stood firm under such fire reassured a weary population that fresh strength had truly arrived.
Within the United States Marine Corps, Belleau Wood became a touchstone almost immediately. Stories of riflemen advancing through wheat and trees, bayonet fights in the dark forest, and the nickname Devil Dogs fused into a narrative of toughness and determination. Like all battlefield memory, the legend simplified some of the complexity, but it rested on real endurance and real loss. Training, recruiting, and Marine culture drew heavily on that legacy, reinforcing the idea that every Marine, regardless of specialty, was first and always a rifleman capable of holding a hard line.
Today, visitors can walk the ground around Belleau Wood and see memorials, preserved trenches, and quiet terrain that once shook with artillery and machine gun fire. For students of military history and units on staff rides, the battle offers more than a story of bravery. It shows how a relatively small area held by determined troops can influence a larger campaign. It also shows how adaptation, cooperation between services, and endurance can turn a crisis into a foothold. The quietness of the ground now only makes the violence of June 1918 harder to ignore.
Reputations in war are not born in slogans or posters. They are forged where people in the line decide again and again not to yield. Belleau Wood became one of those places for the Marine Corps and for the wider American story in World War I. Its legacy still echoes from the wheat fields and shattered trees of 1918 to every later generation that studies the battle and walks the ground. You can hear more narrated Headline Wednesday features in the Dispatch audio editions from dispatch.trackpads.com, and you can find more conversation and daily facts with the U.S. Military History Group on LinkedIn. Headline Wednesday is developed by Trackpads.com as part of Dispatch, U.S. Military History Magazine.